I'm really excited to be here today and speak with you all about our marine invasive species monitoring program. The program began in 2006, and as Ben said in the introduction, I became part of the program just a couple years ago, so I'm still learning a lot too. I learned a lot from the presentations already shared in the workshop today. So since we're doing things virtually, I'm gonna get there we go. Here is me, in case your video is small. If you see me out doing some sampling in Kachemak Bay in the summer or around, we welcome questions while we're doing our monitoring out there for the marine invasive species we monitor for here in Kachemak Bay, and look forward to collaborating with you all moving forward. So some of you might not have heard or be really familiar with the research reserve, so I'll just give a quick intro there as well. We are part of a national estuary research reserve system. There are 29 designated reserves throughout the United States, including Hawaii and Puerto Rico. The Kachemak Bay Reserve is the most northerly. The reserves are a federally designated estuarine reserve through NOAA, and then each reserve has a state partner. Ours is the University of Alaska Anchorage, and we sit underneath the Center for Coastal Conservation Science, which I'm sure a lot of you have collaborated with in the past. So those two entities together is where the research reserve sits here in Kachemak Bay. This map shows our boundary, and you can see it covers all of Kachemak Bay, so it's a big designation. The research reserve does not own any of the lands or manage any lands. We are about fostering stewardship through education and research. Okay, so I know a lot of you have spent a lot of time working in the terrestrial environment on invasives in our freshwater systems. I'm just going to touch on some of the pathways for introductions in the marine system that might be less familiar. And the first is the transfer of live seafood and bait. So this is a common way for marine species to be introduced to new areas. In fact, European green crab, one of the species we monitor for, it's thought that it was introduced to the west coast of the United States from the east coast through live seafood or bait transfer. As with in the freshwater system, improper disposal of aquarium species into the marine environment can also be a vector. Marine debris is another one. Marine organisms can grow on marine debris or take shelter within it and travel all the way across the ocean basin from Japan all the way over to Alaska. So marine debris is a contributor to new invasion. And then perhaps the first of the two biggest is fouling, biofouling on ship hulls like you see in this image here, or it could be on other infrastructure such as docks that get moved around, oil rigs that come up from the lower 48, or even that come across the ocean from other places. Alaska is a low regulatory state, so there aren't any regulations that require clean, drain, dry practices before moving that kind of infrastructure around. And of course, with ships, if there's anything growing on them, as they go from port to port, they can be introducing new species. And then finally, perhaps globally, the largest contributor to new introductions is ballast water. I'm still learning a lot about this. There's so much to know around ballast water, but I'm going to give you some bullet points here. So first off, ballast water is water that ships take on intentionally to help them maintain their stability as they're going port to port and doing their travels. That water sits in those tanks until such time they no longer need it and they dump it out. It wasn't until 2012 that Coast Guard and EPA adopted standards for how to deal with ballast water, and that process is ongoing still. It was in 2016 the Coast Guard had approved ballast water treatment systems that ships could begin to use. But again, this is still in process. As recently as last fall, the EPA and the Coast Guard had proposals for new standards for the enforcement and final standards for how to deal with ballast water in the United States. So it's ongoing. A lot of people are working on this still and making sure to get good things in there. States are having a voice in these management practices, but it's a big part of the puzzle here to help us all minimize marine introductions moving forward. Oh, sorry, mouse. Okay, so our monitoring program specifically is we have two different main programs. One is for monitoring for European green crab, and the second is for marine invasive tunicates. I'll talk about the tunicate program first. This program is a partnership with Smithsonian Environmental Research Center. They have monitors following the same protocol that we use throughout the United States. These animals here, these are tunicates attached to the line in case you're not familiar, and we'll talk about them a bit more. So tunicates are animals. They have this basic body shape, tubular body, and then two siphons because they're filter feeders. So they take water in, filter out food particles, and then an out siphon for waste and excess seawater. They spend their adult lives attached in one place, like a mussel or a sea anemone does. And they can either be in colonies, like these groups shown here at this low tide picture from Kachemak Bay, or solitary. This just shows some examples of native tunicate species in Alaska. We have quite a few of them here, and there are invasive species to worry about as well. So the big one is Didenum Vexilum, or D-Vex for short, shown growing on this lantern net. It was found in 2010 in Whiting Harbor, which is outside of Sitka. The Department of Fish and Game, with local partners, has worked to manage this population that we know is there, has removed infrastructure where it was growing, as well as have signs posted to inform boaters to stay away and to minimize the transport of this invasive species. But it is, we do know it's here. This is an underwater picture taken of that invasion there from Whiting Harbor. And as you can see, this is a tunicate that grows over everything, and it will smother anything that grows underneath it. So it really decreases the biodiversity. It can be a real problem for, starts growing on your boat, it's going to decrease your fuel efficiency. Any intake or outtake going on as far as seawater systems go, it could clog those. And similar to the talk we were hearing, the video about Elodiac, that in order to remove it physically, you have to make sure you get every little piece of it. This colonial tunicate can be produced by asexual reproduction and cloning. So if you leave any of it behind, it's just going to start growing again. As a lot of you are familiar, chemical treatments are challenging, even in an enclosed system. And when you start thinking about doing that in the marine system, the complications escalate with our tidal systems, with really how do you block that off and only target the area. So really a tough one to deal with. Oop. For the monitoring, we have two main sites in Kachemak Bay, Homer Harbor and Soldovia Harbor. We go out there during the summertime every 4 to 6 weeks. This is a picture of a couple of my coworkers with our guide for our tunicates species and our tote there. We pull up our settling plates and look at them in that tote in water. Things are just easier to identify when they're wet instead of dry and floppy. So the Monterey Protocol, we have a 4x4 PVC plate, which hopefully you guys can see here, attached to a brick, and then we hang it off the dock. And we have 10 of those settling plates distributed throughout the 2 different harbors. After just 4 weeks, we can come back and we might see things looking like this. So a lot grows in summer in Alaska, as we're all aware. We'll identify everything on the plate, take a picture that's contributed to the national database. Anything we're not sure about, we can take a sample and send it off to local experts to help with identification. So far, no invasive tunicates in Kachemak Bay have been confirmed, so we're really excited about that. Moving on to European green crab. So I included this picture intentionally so that you can note that this European green crab is not green. However, there are good ways to identify this crab. And if this is the one thing you take away from my talk is this piece here. European green crab have a distinctive shell shape. They have 5 spines on the outside of each eye and 3 bumps in the middle. And our native crab species don't have that same distinct shell shape. So 5 spines on the outside of each eye, relatively small crab. They only reach a maximum diameter on that back shell of 4 inches. Here's a map of the distribution of green crab. So native areas shown here in blue. The green areas are places where they've already invaded. And you can notice that they are all along the west coast up into BC. which brings us to the area of concern for us in Alaska. The whole shoreline of southern Alaska around the Aleutians and up into Bristol Bay is potential habitat for green crab. And we know that green crab have been spotted within 90 miles of the Alaskan border, so they're very close. They're very close, and they really have, we really don't want them here. So the first thing about green crab that make them such an unwanted species is their burrowing behavior. So you can see from this riverbank here, the green crab have really burrowed back into these soft sediments, contributing to erosion and habitat degradation along these soft sediments in our estuaries or in riverbanks, where we know are so important for so many species like juvenile salmon and other juvenile species for that rearing habitat. They also eat a lot. So European green crabs are omnivores. They'll consume eelgrass, both the plant blade and the seeds. Plus, with the burrowing, they can be really harmful for eelgrass beds. They're also very equipped and good at opening up mussels or clams. So another competition with our local crab species or local shorebird species, folks that want to use those resources for subsistence or commercial harvest as well. And European green crabs will also eat other crabs up to the same size as them. They are capable of surviving in a wide range of salinities and temperatures. This is a picture of the estuary at the head of Tutka Bay here in Kachemak Bay. And everything that you can see that gets wet is a place where a green crab would probably be pretty happy. They can also inhabit rocky intertidal areas. As with a lot of or most other invasive species, green crabs, once they get to an area, reproduce very quickly. So this female is holding over 200,000 eggs, and she can reproduce that twice a year. So what are we doing here in Kachemak Bay? Well, we have a monitoring program started in 2006. We have a huge community component, including going into classrooms, not during a pandemic, twice a year. We go into the classrooms, we work with the students on crab identification, our data sheet, how to set a crab trap, how to handle the crabs safely before we go out in the field with them. You can see here, each student's group is setting a trap out. At each trapping event, we lay out 6 traps, and we do that parallel to the low tide line. We bait the traps with herring, and the traps sit for 24 hours. We go back at that next low tide cycle after 24 hours, and we identify everything that we've caught. Each crab species is measured. We identify whether it's a male or female crab. We identify everything else as well, and all the native species are released alive at the site. We also have community monitors that go out during the summertime from their summer homes or wherever they might be around Kachemak Bay and do sampling events. This is a map of our 2020 sampling locations. We had a couple less sites than normal, as it was an abnormal year for all of us, but we have distribution throughout Kachemak Bay, and we're always looking to increase our sampling footprint and our events for this early detection. Some of our future goals are, as I just mentioned, increasing local awareness and monitoring efforts, supporting partners and launching new monitoring programs. I'm excited to share that in Metlakatla in Southeast Alaska, they have launched a new program last year. So we're excited to see more programs up and coming. Incorporating eDNA sampling is something that all our state partners are working on, getting educated and trained to do. And then collaborating with partners to develop and implement a rapid response drill for European green crab. This is something that we're really excited about, the opportunity to get to do so that we are all more prepared for early response to prevent them, European green crab, from really moving into our habitats here in Alaska. Okay, and then finally, a few resources to share for folks that want to start learning more or reach out to myself or my coworker, Rosie Masui. And I also know Tammy Davis is on the line and Ben as well. So we produce annual reports for our monitoring programs. Those come out every December. There is also, in case anybody's already not aware, monthly marine invasive species committee calls that are a subcommittee from the Alaska Invasive Species network, but that's not the right term. It's an AHAB network, sorry. Washington Sea Grant Crab Team. If anybody wants to know more or see what kind of effort is required to prevent green crab from establishing abundant populations, the Sea Grant Crab Team website is really a great resource. And then finally, on the CABIA website, we have a crab guide, which is shared here with some of our native crab species, as well as the key features for identifying green crab. We also have on that website a guide to some species of Alaska tunicates and the invasive tunicates that we are most concerned about, if you want to take those out next time you go tide pooling. And with that, just want to thank you again for the opportunity to share with you what we're doing at Research Reserve for Invasive Species. And if there's any time for questions, look forward to hearing from you all. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jasmine. So we've got one question in the chat box. It says, what is the closest known EGC location to Homer?
Yeah, it's British Columbia, 90 miles south of the border. And I am spacing on the name of where that was, but it's BC. So there you go. British Columbia.
Right. Any other questions?
I just wanted to chime in with a thank you, Jasmine. And, you know, now that we are a cooperative invasive species management area, instead of just a weed management area, I'm excited that, you know, those of us who have traditionally worked with terrestrial invasive plants and are able to kind of expand our own knowledge of being able to identify and report other invasive species. So thank you.
Yeah, and I guess I would just want to add, you made me think of Catherine, I didn't say yet, that the invasive species reporting line that Fish and Game has set up works for marine species as well. So do use it.
Great. There were a couple more questions that came in. Renee asks, is there a map that you can send out to everyone that shows the boundaries of the research reserve, the Kachemak Bay Research Reserve?
Yeah, what's the best way to, I can share that map with you, Catherine, and maybe to send out, or what?
Yeah, why don't you do that? That'd be great. You can send it to the whole list. And then Dennis Chumley asks, do you also sample for introduced mussels, etc.?
No, our monitoring program is specifically focused on marine species. One thing I do, we're focused on green crab and invasive tunicate species. I do think that having the settling plates like we use, you know, if some other larval species that we might not have on our radar yet shows up and it's invasive and settles on the plate, it's a way that it can be picked up and detected as well. So that's why we identify everything, not just the tunicate species. And with the green crab trapping, there's also opportunity there for other invasives to show up that we might not be specifically targeting or on our radar. So by being out there looking, as with many of you know in the terrestrial or freshwater environment as well, we're always going to be more likely to detect something that is not native.
Great, thanks. And there are just a lot of thank yous coming in the chat.
All right, so last call for questions before we move on to our next video break. All right, well that, Maurer, if you have the next videos ready, if you want to queue those up, we'll watch those. Oh, looks like one more question came in. Do you know of any such monitoring efforts in Dutch Harbor? Lots of international traffic there.
Yeah, I know that I don't know of long-term monitoring efforts out there in Dutch. And if Tammy is still on the line, maybe she can answer with a little more history awareness of the monitoring that might be happening out there. Except for she's muted, huh? I will say that there have been different monitoring efforts throughout the state for green crab and for tunicate over the years, and some that have been long running. Yeah, that's what I could say about that.
Visit kenaiinvasives.org to learn more.